Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to all of you to the Körber Forum, and also a warm welcome to all those who are watching our live stream. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Thomas Paulsen, and I'm the chairman of the executive board of Körber-Stiftung. Well, when I look into this room, I must say I'm a bit surprised that there are so many politik junkies here in Hamburg. Why I'm saying this, politik junkies who just can't get enough of politics even after a weeks-long campaign here in Germany and also the election day yesterday. And you're here to even discuss a very difficult topic. Of course, there are good reasons to do that. The first one is probably that given the geopolitical hurricane that is raging in our world, we can't lose time to make Europe more effective and a stronger player in international affairs, so there is no time to rest. And also, without Germany, that is clear, this is not going to happen. The second reason, even maybe more important reason, is that today marks the 3rd anniversary of the Russian full invasion to Ukraine. 3 years later, the desire for peace is strong, first and foremost, of course, in Ukraine, but also in Germany and in other European countries. That is understandable, yet, as we know from history, peace is not so easy. Peace is a process. Peace settlements usually involve multiple actors. They are built on preconditions and negotiations. Peace takes time. And if peace arrangements are supposed to be sustainable, justice is a very, very important aspect to it. To put it in other words, a peace arrangement that is forced upon Ukraine, Diktatfrieden, we have this German word for that, would not be a just peace. It could also be a false peace, Scheinfrieden, which runs the risk of being not very stable. I'm particularly pleased that tonight we have 2 guests here in the Körber Forum who are in an excellent position and also a very good combination to discuss this question of a just peace for Ukraine. And let me start with our guest from Ukraine. Oleksandra Romantsova has been campaigning against human rights violations and war crimes in Ukraine for over 10 years now. Since 2017, she has been the executive director of an Ukrainian NGO, the Center for Civil Liberties. Together with the Russian human rights organization Memorial and the Belarusian human rights lawyer Ales Bialyatsky, her NGO was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. For many years, she has personally been involved in projects for mobile monitoring of human rights violations and war crimes committed by Russian soldiers. So she has first-hand knowledge about the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Dear Oleksandra, welcome to Hamburg. Welcome to Körber-Stiftung. It's wonderful to have you here. Our second guest is Jörn Leonhardt, professor of modern and contemporary history at the University of Freiburg and one of the leading German historians of our time. His research focuses on empires, peace processes, and the beginning and end of wars. He tries to find out how conflicts of the past can help us to put current conflicts into a more historic and strategic context. Professor Leonhardt, welcome to the Körber Forum. Your second time here. Welcome once again. Ladies and gentlemen, as direct talks between the United States and Russia are progressing on Ukraine, but without Ukraine so far at the table, I feel it is important to say at this point that our solidarity remains and belongs to Ukraine and its people. Aside of humanitarian support, Körber-Stiftung has been continuously supporting our project partners in Ukraine in various ways. One of them is the Ukrainian History Competition, which is part of our European network of history competitions. Also, we are working with Russian opposition in exile, like the NGO Memorial, which is also part of the U-Story network. Our debate tonight will be chaired by Gabriele Woldejko, who is the head of our History and Politics department. And with this, I would like to ask Oleksandra, Professor Leonhardt, and Gabi to the floor. Thank you very much.
Yes, good evening also from my side, and sorry for heading this discussion in English tonight, but my experience shows that it's always easier to have one common language on the panel, and those of you who don't feel happy with English can use the translation devices. Let me give you a bit of like 3 minutes of more context. We've heard about 3 years of full-scale invasion into Ukraine, Russian full-scale invasion, but the war has been going on for 10 years. It started with the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. We are talking about thousands of civilians and soldiers that have been killed and injured on the Ukrainian side, also on the Russian side, to be honest, but a lot of victims in Ukraine. We are talking about more than 20,000 children that have been detained from Russian-occupied territories to Russia. We're talking about an enormous amount of destruction, and we're talking about Ukraine as a country fighting for its survival. So I think it is appropriate to take, let's say, 10 or 15 seconds of silence to commemorate the victims of that this war has led to so far, and then we continue. So yeah, let's. Thanks a lot. So, Thomas Paulsen has already mentioned that there is a lot of dynamics in the peace, in the so-called peace talks. We have a new administration in the US. They have started talking to Russia about peace in Ukraine, without Ukraine. Europe is challenged today. I don't know who of you have seen the news today. There is a big gathering. 22 out of 27 EU commissioners are in Kiev today. Ursula von der Leyen is there and others. So there's a big European solidarity shown today on this anniversary. And this is the backdrop we will be discussing tonight about just peace. We all have a desire for peace, for first and foremost Ukraine, I would say, and the Ukrainian people. So the question is, when can we call a peace a just peace? So let me start with that and ask you for 2 brief answers. I know it's a very complicated topic, but just peace, what do we mean by that? What is it about? Let me start with the historian, Jörn Leonhardt.
I think the real challenge is to give you a short answer, but
yes, please.
I think our idea of a just peace is an ideal type, and it's not about yes or no, but how close can we come to just peace. And I just mention 2 elements that are vital. One is an absence of one-sided, asymmetric concessions. And the second is a productive role of international law as a basis for a peace that both sides can accept, and that includes, for instance, the recognition of victimhood and, in a way, a search for what you've called justice, not just the absence of military escalation or physical violence, but a definition of justice to the victims and justice to a society. I think that is what some sort of approximation to just peace could mean.
Oleksandra, from your point of view, as someone who has been working on the ground, documenting war crimes, having won the Nobel Peace Prize for the work your organization is doing, Center for Civil Liberties, as a Ukrainian citizen, what would you say? What is a just peace for you?
You know, theory of peace building told about peacemaking, peace building, peacekeeping, like three main stages. If peacemaking includes ceasefire, sure. So peace building and peacekeeping speak about justice and speak about opportunity to study, learn from this experience. I mean, nobody changed it one day. If Russia Federation decided attack, that means they think that it's good opportunity exists for that. So for Ukrainians, sure, we need that our defenders, men and women, stop to dying every day. But next step, what they for dying? They dying for our opportunity to develop our country like democracy, rule of law country, and country of human rights. So we need to have peace, its conditions to have such a country. So that will be a constant peace for us.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to that, to the framework of peace and peacemaking. Jörn Leonhard, in Germany, a much used phrase during the last couple of years was, every war somewhere ends at the negotiation table. And there is a kind of agreement or a peace settlement. This is what history shows us. What do you think about that as a historian? Is that true? I mean, how do wars end?
It very much depends. There are wars that do not end at negotiation tables. For instance, colonial wars do not end at negotiation tables because European colonial powers did not regard colonial societies as equals. And for them, this kind of colonial warfare was some sort of police action. And once you've finished or completed the police action, you just went on with colonial regimes. The idea about the negotiation table has to do with the ideal of state-led war, in which states somehow recognize each other as equals. And one of the important, you may say, historical legacies of the 30 Years' War in the 17th century is exactly that, the idea of state-led wars that allow you to build peace on the premise of equality. So you can then somehow negotiate a little bit of territory, a little bit of financial reparation, maybe some sort of dynastic combination, a daughter and a son of two rivals get married, and somehow you have the equilibrium, the balance of power restored. But if we take this story of war and peace from a global point of view, there are a lot of wars that don't end at the negotiation table. And one other point, I'm sure we'll come back to that, the number of wars that end with classical peace conferences after 1945 goes down. Because a lot of states after 1945 do not want to be legally bound by international law. They are quite keen on using a temporary armistice to maybe fill the arsenal and then start and restart and remobilize for war a couple of months or years later. So in a way, we have maybe a high expectation what peace negotiations and peace conferences should achieve, but the very instrument of ending wars in the way it happened in the 18th or 19th century is not easily applicable to our present time.
Oleksandra, let's do a bit of maybe housekeeping on terminology. If we listen to Jörn Leonhard talking about classical peace agreements going down after 1945 and talking about colonial wars, how can we apply that on the current situation of Ukraine, on the current situation when the US and Russia started talks about starting talks? Let me put it very, how to say, carefully. So what are we talking about? Is it starting negotiations? Is it what is it in the case?
Things looks like dancing, you know.
It looks like what?
Dancing.
Okay.
I mean, it's you know, exists such kind of dancing which called tango suicide, you know. So it's look like this. I'm just trying to explain why. All of us, we trying to care about, well, like values of democracy, and we think that all the system of international law, starting from the point that each country wanna be democracy state with rule of law and human rights respect, but for now we have this situation when we are not sure that two really big and powerful countries exactly care about these values. And that's why we have different kinds of process in different levels. And now when Ukrainians told about we just want to choose the democracy and live with that, and Americans population choose the Trump, and we are not sure that they care about democracy now and equality and something like this. And that's why when we speak about negotiation, they can talk. Always better talk if it's if they talk and not shoot. But in that time, we calculate that 22,000 air attack we have during only 1 year, 2024. 22,000. So I don't know what they need to speak about that Russia stopped shooting from one side. From other side, is it possible to have a safety without equality? Hypothetically, yes. But that was not what we want. We don't want to be frozen like Nagorno-Karabakh till against it's not started be a war zone. We don't want to have such a system like Bosnia and Herzegovina when you are not sure that you will have like some development or not. At the end, Ukrainian society want to be a healthy, productive, competitive, like member of EU family. So, are they speak about peace? I think now they speak about their own interest, and I hope that peace will be a part of interest of USA, for example, because Trump it's not only one who represents the system. U.S. system strong and big, and we hope that it will, you know, balance with interest of Trump and his group and interest of USA, because I believe that USA have an interest of the peace and democracy in the future.
Jörn Leonhard, may I get back to you and ask you about negotiations versus victory. So we've heard about the negotiation side. Russia is talking, Russia and the US are talking about Ukraine, without Ukraine, and the Europeans at the table. But if we look, especially if we look at what we've heard today from Kiev, there was a strong solidarity message from different European actors saying that we will assist Ukraine as long with whatever it takes, and Ukraine needs to win. So, as a historian, this victory narrative, is peace through negotiations more realistic when Ukraine gets the opportunity to go into the negotiations, in whatever negotiations, out of a position of strength?
Well, let me start by just one basic observation. The American president has acknowledged 3 basic Russian war aims.
That's true,
He
yes.
has acknowledged the concession of territory with no exchange for real security. He has accepted non-membership of Ukraine in NATO, and he has accepted to damage Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is the real message that comes from the fact that the two, Putin and Trump, begin what reminds me, as a historian of the 19th and 20th century, of the Great Game. The small club of European and American power, maybe Japanese power towards the end of the 19th century. And it's a kind of international deal-making, but it's nothing to do with rule-based international politics. It's nothing to do with international law. And that makes the whole idea of a large negotiation table where all actors are invited and are treated as equals not superfluous, but at the moment at least very unrealistic. It's wonderful if European politicians go to Kiev, as they have done in recent years, but the essence is, and this is my personal opinion, that Europe has done too little, too late. And this is exactly what will be asked by historians in maybe 1 or 2 generations. And there is hardly any country in Europe that will have a more difficult time in answering these questions than Germany. And it's wonderful to have peace rhetoric. It's wonderful to have a rhetoric of how important international law is. But Europe did too little, too late, in order to make Ukraine strong enough to defend itself. And my last point on that question is the way in which wars end always generate signals for future conflicts. In other words, why should any aggressor, be it in Taiwan, China, be it in South America, be it between Armenia and Azerbaijan, why should any aggressor stop aggression if a rule-based international regime does not work, and if towards the end of a whole long process, it's the number of weapons and tanks and missiles and drones that defines who will have access to the negotiation table. And this is what Thomas Paulsen has called the hurricane of international politics, because it really questions, you could say, the European raison d'etat, the European way of anticipating a better world, a better international regime, and that is at stake now. And so far, I don't see that Europe has really found an efficient answer to that problem, despite the fact that the warnings were all on the table.
Brief question, a follow-up question to you as a historian before I come back to you, Oleksandra. When you were talking, you and Leonhard, about Russia and the US talking about Ukraine, you said it reminds me of 19th and 20th century Great Game. So, do the empires strike back?
I wouldn't say empires as in the sense of the 19th century, although we see how important territory is already. But we are talking about a kind of imperiality as a mode of thinking. And that means, of course, that you have a hierarchy of those who are in the club of deciding international politics and those who are not sovereign to do that. And that reminds you of this somehow defining the world spheres of the 19th century. If you take, for instance, the Russian Empire and the British Empire in the war zone of Afghanistan and Persia and India from the 1950s onwards. I'm not saying that this is a repetition of history, but what it does, and that is really important for us, it really questions, it puts into question all the achievements we thought would expand and make the world safer and better and more peaceful. You may say it's another blow to our hopes in 1989, 91, that we could make a world free, peaceful, progressive. And if you asked people in 1989, 91, people anticipated a bright future. The future was insecure, you could say, but it was bright, it promised something. And the big difference now is the future is again very insecure, but it's no longer bright. It's to do with a reduced half-time of security, and that's the big difference.
Oleksandra, when we look at Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, I was mentioning, you know, the war has started 10 years ago, 3 years of full-scale invasion. You have told us about 22,000 strikes only in 1 year, airstrikes. So the question is resilience. Where does resilience is an important element of surviving in war times. Where does Ukrainian society get the resilience from? What is the core of it?
I think it's two main pillar. First one, it's understanding that nobody for you will not build your own country. So it's your own responsibility. Democracy, it's not only that you have a voice, you have a right, you have a responsibility. Mm-hmm. So that's first feeling. You don't have, you adult at the room. Other adults not come in and not make for you your own state. Second, it's a humor.
Humor?
Yeah. I think if somebody says something or not say, we are waiting something say or something like this, we always make jokes. Because it's impossible, seriously, accept all what happened last 11 years. So we have a huge numerous of jokes about Third World War. Mm-hmm. And one of them, it's about that, whole scare about that. And even Ukrainians maybe will scare about that, but they can say, yeah, we told you before, something like that. So it's sometimes it's not a funny, but it's literally help you not lose your mind and mental health during all of this. We are tired, we're angry, we hate a lot. We hate a lot sometimes even inside groups, and we will need have a lot of dialogues after all of this, if we will have some opportunities. But that's a problem with this negotiation. Most of people at Ukraine don't believe that even this negotiation and any result of them give us a break.
Mm-hmm.
To,
talking about
out
the US-Russia negotiations.
Any their agreement will still have this point that any moment Russia cannot respect this agreement. Same like it's happened with Budapest Memorandum or international humanitarian law or something like this, because they create new war crime. They kidnap civilians, keep them at the jail 3 years. We speak about that, and nobody can take them back from there, and any Red Cross committee can come there. So it's like you told them, but exist the rules that they say, we don't care. So it's how you can negotiate, how you can have agreement, deal with someone
who doesn't accept the rules of international law.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll come back to the framework of international law. Let's look a bit into the dangers and challenges of an unjust peace. My first question, Jörn Leonhard, what is to you the major example, historical example of an unjust peace that we can kind of look at to analyze what may lie ahead of Ukraine?
Not an easy answer, because if you mention one peace, then you build up false, or you're in the danger of building up false analogies. But since a lot of Germans are aware of the Versailles Peace Treaty, it's maybe worth mentioning that the Paris Peace Conference starts as a conference where only the victorious powers communicate with each other. Mm-hmm. The defeated are not invited, neither Germany nor Austria, nor the representatives of the Ottoman Empire or Bulgaria, mm-hmm. nor Hungary, nor Austria. And what is the result of that? I would call it crisis or failure of political communication. It means that the peace, as a result, becomes highly emotionalized and becomes regarded by the Germans as, we've mentioned it already, as a Diktatfrieden, mm-hmm. as a kind of juridical trial by which the guilt of the Germans is measured. And we now know that this impregnated in a very negative way the political culture of the Weimar Republic. The war guilt question, the reparation question, they are not the only reasons, but they contribute to the rise of Adolf Hitler, who promises the Germans to get rid of these conditions of what he calls Diktatfrieden. And what it shows is that the idea of equality of the actors, a kind of fair mediation between the actors, but also the absence of humiliation, of Demütigung, the importance of good political communication are all very important elements if you try and prepare what we may call an approximation to the ideal of just peace. Mm. It's not an analogy, because Ukraine was attacked by Russia, obviously. And it's much more complicated if you look at the First World War. But just to mention what are the results if particular parties or actors are not invited to the table. It means that it becomes really difficult for such a society to accept the outcome of a peace. And then, of course, a peace negotiation becomes the prelude to an armistice, becomes the prelude to a new war inside crisis. I mean, when the Versailles Treaty is signed in June 1919, a lot of non-German contemporaries argue this is not the signing of a peace treaty, it's an armistice for maybe 2 or 5 or 10 years. So there is a contemporary appreciation of what is wrong with this kind of peace negotiation and peace communication.
Oleksandra, how big would you say is the danger of an unjust peace for Ukraine? And then second question, Ukraine has a very vibrant civil society. You are discussing a lot, even in times of war inside your country. So this issue of accepting a peace agreement, what do you think, what would it take for civil society to accept any kind of peace agreement? What would have to be delivered?
First of all, lands, it's important, sure, but we care about people first, mm-hmm. and we even start such campaign which called People First, because we have, like, I mean, in whole numbers, I think it's near 100,000 people, adult people who was or prisoned like war prisoners, or prisoned like civilians, and we need to bring them back. It's one. Second, it's a question about occupied zone. Because occupation, it's not a peace. It's not just to change the flag situation. It's situation when gray zone, without any rules, without any opportunities to protect your life, your property, your family, your words, you can say anything. So occupation not bring the safety. It's just, and not stop suffering of people. It's just make this suffering invisible. So for civil society, we need a guarantee. We need a guarantee of secure all the people, whole the territory of Ukraine. We need have opportunity to memorialize all the people and all the situation when people killed or suffer or survived because of war crimes and crimes against humanity and episode of genocide. We need to have a freedom of speech. We have, I think, 10 years we have questioning for people at Ukraine what's main human rights for you, and people of Ukraine say about freedom of speech. Sometimes it's unpoliteness discussion, but to have opportunity to say what you think, that's top priority of freedoms which exactly Ukraine care of. And for us, for civil society, sometimes civil society is stronger than state institutions, because Ukrainians mostly don't like strong state. That's 2014, that was first time when Ukrainians started to think about maybe strong state, it's not so bad if this state can protect you. But before that, we quite anarchy society, seriously. But that means that hold the responsibility not at the state like a structure, hold the responsibility at society. And we feel it. And I don't believe that any agreement which will not accept by population give opportunity politicians have their career next day after this negotiation, after this signing. It's not even like, I don't know, Lech Walesa in Poland, he had only one period like a president because that was not easy presidency. But it's possible of next Maidan in the middle of the war if people will not feel that that was highest possibility which we have from this negotiation. Because people expected that politician, it's your job, have a good opportunity for us at this negotiation. You need to find the skills, you need to find the knowledges, you need to have enough information and talent to bring something which guarantee us some safety. I think, sure, we will have some territory which will be gray zone, because we need some buffer zone between us and Russian state, till Russian state will exist. But this gray zone need to be, we know people who will never left it. So it's not way how in Cyprus, they just, Greek and Turkey population, they just come to.
So the gray zone will not be empty.
Yes, it
there
will
be people living there.
People will live in there, and for understanding east part of Ukraine, it's most popular. Now we calculate near 4.5 million people still live there. We don't know sure because we don't have access to 22% of our territory.
Yeah.
So it will not be just, you know, empty land. There will be people there. These people will be civilians, and some of them even, I think, will think about some partisan resilience or something like that. So that means like just trying this plan, like Trump say about we will send out Palestinians and make a resort there. It's not what exactly.
This will not work for Ukraine. This
No.
will probably also not work for Gaza Strip, but that's a different topic anyway. Okay, that was an interesting one, Oleksandra, because you said yeah, okay, the land and territory is one question, but if I understood you correctly, you were very much into we need the opportunity, we need the space to commemorate and to talk about victims. We need to talk about war crimes that happened. Jörn Leonhard, a question to you when it comes to dealing with war crimes after a war or during a war. We don't know when this war is going to end, to be honest. How can we understand the role of dealing with war crimes as a precondition or as an element of a just peace? How important is that? And of course, one example that comes to my mind, but that's also a very dangerous analogy, and probably it isn't even an analogy. I mean, after the Second World War, when Germany was defeated and the Allies liberated Europe from National Socialist terror, there were the Nuremberg trials that, well, the Germans didn't invent it, but it was the Allies who brought justice after the Second World War. So trials about war crimes, how important would that be? Is that?
As a historian, I would like first of all to say that this is a very recent historical development. It starts towards the end of the 19th century, and it plays a very important role after the First World War. The first war criminals called to be handed over are German war criminals. The Kaiser is regarded as a war criminal, and in a way the war tribunals of Nuremberg and Tokyo have to do with the experience that this kind of international justice didn't work properly after the First World War. By the way, it leads to an enormous resistance among many Germans. I mean, the embitterment has very much to do with the idea of being guilty, of being accused. So if we talk about justice, we need to be aware that the effects on societies can be very complex. I mean, let's talk about Serbia in the Den Haag tribunals. It first led to a kind of solidarity with a lot of war criminals. And if you look at the example of Nuremberg and Tokyo, I mean, the impressive thing is that the Allied powers argued we have to define international standards what war against humanity is, and then we have to do it according to these norms and not according to our will or our idea what we want to do with Germany. So the idea of international norms is very important. But what was the result of these Nuremberg trials in German society? As historians, we now talk about the trap of victimization. It led many Germans to believe that the real guilty ones had been accused and sentenced, and that all the other Germans were in a way exonerated. So it in a way made it more difficult for ordinary Germans to come to terms with their own individual responsibility in the regime of NS. I'm not going to make false analogies, but it's very important to talk about the consequences of justice. The important thing is the idea of peace in modern history is in a way much more than just the absence of violence or military escalation. But it also means that there is a danger to overload a peace with expectations that cannot be fulfilled. And that non-fulfillment of high expectations, what you want to achieve, not only the end of war, but justice, recognition of victimhood, maybe even some sort of stability, social security. I mean, if you look at the League of Nations in the 1920s, they go away from the idea that wars are caused by power rivalries. They refer to social and political factors within societies. So in a way, we have developed ever greater expectations of what a peace should achieve, while at the same time, as we discussed at the beginning of this podium, the instruments to achieve peace after 1945 have become more difficult. And this is the dilemma we are faced with at the moment.
Instruments have become more difficult. That brings me to the international institutions, of course. Jörn Leonhard mentioned the League of Nations that was founded as a result of the First World War. Then we can also talk about the United Nations that have been founded as a consequence of the Second World War. I know that your organization is, for example, you have a number of initiatives. One is called Tribunal for Putin. So you are very much into working into that international legal framework with the International Criminal Court. And the question is, to me, to what extent do you think that the setbacks that we see at the International Criminal Court, for example, the decision not to punish neither South Africa nor Mongolia for hosting President Putin when he visited these countries. So how can we operate in the framework of international institutions when they are, on the other hand, let's say, I wouldn't say dysfunctional, but at least challenged?
You know, it's really interesting because they was created for wars of 20 centuries. And I think most of them, all of these structures, they're huge. I mean, UN, now at Ukraine we have 47 different agencies of UN, funds, agency representations, and all of them like escape when full-scale invasion are coming.
So they all went out?
Yeah, they went out, and only staff which was Ukrainian citizens stay. Red Cross Committee, same. They just were out. But all of these challenges which they was built for, all of these challenges still continue somewhere in the globe. Near 2 billion people have a fresh water only because UN work. So it's a question we're waiting that UN will manage all the problems, but UN consists from countries. And when we speak about 5 Council of Security members, it's strange if you look at them, geographic of USA, China, Great Britain, France, and Russia. Okay, so where are any Latin America, African, or Asian countries big enough, like India, South Africa, or I don't know, Brazil? And they speak about that architecture of all of these bodies, they're not enough modern. To modern situation don't give opportunity exactly be equal partners at this table. But Russia and China mostly use this veto.
In the Security Council.
And even not about some cases around the aggression of Russia Federation. And that was last 30 years, they have more than 10 aggressive campaigns around their borders. So that's a big question. Yeah, that there was a people, great people who built UN. But if we wanted that UN answer for modern challenge of hybrid war, it's our responsibility to change it, to give opportunity other countries to be a part of making decision. And is it make it easier and quicker? No, it's bring more transparency, I think. And I think we need to conclude that if states will not respect some agreements, so just to change the structure or just like incorporate someone new, in this round. It's not the change any situation with the wars. So as for me, main idea of changes of international bodies, it's bring their ideas and bring their new models. Maybe it will be just the models plus, UN plus, UN OSCE, who absolutely stuck for now, plus something. Tribunal for Putin, it's initiative which we documented the war crimes. We are going to the field and we speak with the people, we collect the evidence, collect the testimony. Why that doing just normal, common people? Because we have 83,000 episodes from 2022 and some tail, but I not remembered who, like near the 84,000. General Prosecutor Office had more than 150,000 cases. So it's most documented conflict in the whole history of human being. It's impossible that we manage it by ourselves. And that's more important, that it's international crimes. So here in Germany, we have some cases by universal jurisdiction. We bring it here at the national trial. Why it's so important for us? Because our system of justice never have such challenges. But your system or system other countries with really respectable system of trial can help to look at this case, international crimes, and give their own opinion, give their own conclusions about that. So it can be examples how to manage other category of crimes. And I think a lot of historical professor will be interesting in all our database. But we first of all interesting to justice for each person who's suffering, was victim or witness of these crimes.
Okay, so there is this process of justice where you said you need support from other countries that are more, let's say, experienced or equipped in these processes. Jörn Leonhard, there was one thing that Oleksandra said that made me listen, and I'd like to turn that question to you. She said the international institutions that we are operating with, like the United Nations and others, they were built for conflicts of the 20th century, when they are not well equipped for the 21st century. Would you agree to that, or do we have a different point of view? And the second question is, we do have a lot of things, but we don't have time. So the question is, if there is the necessity to reform the international institutions parallel to a war that is ongoing, so how do we cope with that? But is it like 20th century institutions not fit for the 21st?
I mean, if you look at the history of the League of Nations and the United Nations, they build upon the idea of the sovereign nation state. That's in a way the pillar. And the expectation after the First World War, and to an extent also after the Second World War, is that if you take this basis, you can develop regulations how to prevent war, or if you have a war, how to get out of it. And the problem is that after 1945, the number of non-state-led wars gets higher and higher. You have civil wars, you have wars as a result of decolonization, and you have hybrid wars in which the boundaries between civil war, ethnic cleansing, and terrorism become blurred. There are a lot of experiences of violence where you are no longer able to say who are the actors whom you can invite for a peace negotiation table. Think about Syria a couple of years ago with a lot of regional warlords, with interventions from the outer space. So in a way, there are very strong indications that, as I said at the beginning of our discussion, the old idea of state wars, for which you have an established instrument how to end the war and how to achieve peace is no longer what really characterizes our current situation. If you take the war in Ukraine, it's not one war, it's many wars.
How many is it?
It's a territorial war. It's a hybrid war. It's a war fought with tanks and with drones. It's an economic war. It's an energy war. It's a media war. It's a cyber war. It's a war about values. It's a war about global interest zones. It seems to become a war that allows deal-making on global levels. It's a war about zones of interest anticipating the 21st century. And that complex combination, this hybrid of many wars, of course, define the agenda of peacemakers. If you want to know what the peacemaking is all about, you need to know what the nature of war is. And the longer a war is in existence, the more it accumulates different wars. And that is what I think we are confronted with. And compared with this complexity, I think international law is an important element, but it is, for many wars, not the most effective instrument. Think about the boundaries of international war in civil wars, or in matters of terrorism, or in new wars where you have hybrid flotations of war actors that may not have procura to go to a negotiation table and sign an agreement. And even if they sign it, you cannot be sure that they are really responsible for putting a written document into practice. So to put that short, I think one of the things that makes us nervous is the fact that the instruments developed in the 20th century are no longer ideally qualified to deal with the wars we are confronted with now.
Okay, so we have heard a lot about complexity and what is where we are facing analogies, or let's say maybe false analogies. We have heard a lot about what is not easily possible. We haven't spoken much about diplomacy yet. I mean, which role, if we are facing a war that has so many multiple layers, as Jörn Leonhard was saying, if the international institutions are at least, how to say, challenged to cope with that war. So diplomacy is a very traditional, well-established way of preparing peace negotiations. So do you see a role for diplomacy to prepare to end this war? And who are the actors? That would be my question to you then. So what role for diplomacy?
It's a really interesting question. I'm just first time started to think about that. If we have a hybrid war, so we have a hybrid diplomacy. I think officially we call diplomat someone who represents the state. Mm-hmm. But, for example, first group of prisoners of war who was other citizenship than Ukraine but have agreement with Ukrainian army, they was released through Saudi Arabia and through Russian oligarch. And you say, okay, he is not represent state, he is not represent Russian, he is represent money and his own connections.
Mm-hmm. That's this question about the actors, obviously.
So, yeah, so when we speak about diplomacy, we speak about any actors or only official diplomats of represent the state. Or, for example, we speak about big corporation who interesting at the Russian oil, or big corporation who interesting don't have a sanction around the technological sphere, and they same wanna speak. Or we speak about holy table. I mean Vatican, for example, who always traditionally have such mediation, role. Mm-hmm. and a lot of religion figure at Ukraine trying to bring people from captivity, you know, so sometimes it's happened, sometimes they start to be a target. So do we have someone who will be sure, secured when they trying to have a negotiation in this way? I think yes, if they will represent the state, because state it's still some power, some structure. But if they will be most effective, I'm not sure. Because we need that both state, both part, or a lot of part, recognize that these diplomats have a right to be in process.
Have a mandate.
Have a mandate, yes. And so we think 11 years, who can speak with Putin about political prisoners, because they started kidnap them from 2014. And we started to think about whom he respects at all. So, and you figure out that how he told that Dalai Lama died, so, Gandhi died, so he don't have any, you know, any counterparts for deep communication or something like this. So that's why, from one side, we have a lot of fears around the Trump, but Putin recognized Trump like a figure with whom he prepared to speak. Putin recognized China representatives. And I don't see anyone else.
It's a bit, might be a bit disappointing for us as German and European citizens. Right. Jörn Leonhardt, diplomacy and the actors. So I found very interesting what Oleksandra said, that we have like classical actors, diplomats representing the state, obviously. We have, Ukraine has ambassadors and in all different kinds of countries, but we also have these unusual, let's say, actors. Is that, who has an agency, do you think, to speak and negotiate for Ukraine when it comes to diplomacy, diplomatic efforts to end the war?
Well, first of all, I mean, the historical function of diplomats is to stabilize a chronically unstable world. If you look at the history of professional diplomacy, it starts when there are modern states where a king or a prince cannot be in all the other metropoles, and then you have an ambassador that represents a state in a different country. And the good thing about diplomacy is that if it works well, it profits from experience. It profits from the in-between. It profits from formal and informal communication, from network building, from backstage communication. And that means that diplomacy, if it works well, helps to develop something like trust. Who are the people with whom we can somehow begin a communication? What are the institutional frameworks that we need? What are the little steps with which we find out whether an actor is really prepared for a concession, maybe an armistice, maybe a conference, whatever. And the good thing about diplomacy is that diplomats have a lot of instruments before an official meeting, backstage communication, contact groups, people that know each other from maybe the UN sessions or wherever. And it helps politicians to find out who are the people we should be aware of. Are they near to the political center, or is it just some sort of alibi actor? And of course, that is extremely important in this moment when you try and find an exit to a war. It prepares the way to communication, and communication is an element of trust building. And of course, there is hardly anything that is so important in this long transition from war to peace than trust. We've talked about the procura. I mean, who has procura? Whom can you trust? And who is able to put an armistice or a peace treaty into practice? Who would be a good intermediator? Who would be an intermediator with some sort of robust mandate? Think about Richard Holbrooke and the Dayton Agreement. That was somebody who was prepared to say, well, we'll bring the main actors on an air base, and they get food and drink, but they will not be allowed to leave before
we have signed
something. And before we have proof that this is put into some sort of practice, and if it's not put into practice, we are prepared to militarily intervene. I mean, it's, again, nothing we can use as an analogy, but it illustrates a little bit the capacity of diplomacy if it works well. But it presupposes something, and that is a minimum of international standards, international norms, and if that is in a way taken away, and if only interests between some members of a kind of great men club define what the regime of international politics is, then of course the space of interaction for diplomats is heavily reduced, and that is what, in a way, I fear is happening right now.
I'm coming to the last two questions, because I would like to open up to your questions. In the audience, you can already start preparing for questions. Jörn Leonhard, a brief follow-up issue on what you said about the preparing a peace arrangement when two men talk to each other, and we need a basis of, let's say, some basic standards. If you are observing what is happening now, is there any kind of actor who could kind of guarantee these minimum standards? I mean, of course, I'm asking because, you know, we've seen that the EU has had this big meeting in Kiev today, and all very supportive. EU plus it was in Kiev. So is there any role for Europe in that great game?
Well, if there is no role for Europe, then I'm really nervous about the future of Europe. I mean, if there is one major actor now, but is it an actor? Is it one actor, or is it a kind of many actors? Then it has to be Europe. It's obviously no longer the United States. I mean, as a historian, I'm still puzzled by the fact that Donald Trump is the leader of the Republican Party. This is the party of Ronald Reagan. And it's difficult, we talked about it at the beginning of this evening. I mean, the one thing that illustrates what has happened is that a political grandson of Konrad Adenauer and Helmut Kohl yesterday evening said it's now time for Germany and Western Europe to distance itself from the United States. That gives you exactly, that gives you an idea of what we are facing. But the only answer can be that Europe has to find not only a tactical or political, but a strategic answer to the problem of security questioned by an aggressor, and the aggressor is Russia. And if Europe doesn't find some sort of a unified answer, if not an answer by all members of the European Union, then at least by a core group of countries.
Coalition of the willing.
Whatever you call it. But if that is not happening, then the price, the economic price, but also the political price we face in coming years, if not decades, will be much, much higher. Europe has not done what it should have done with regard to Ukraine. Europe has promised a lot and has not kept the promises, and it should not repeat this experience because then it really puts itself into danger.
Okay. Oleksandra, I'm almost sure that 90% of the people in this room feel very challenged by the discussion we had, but also feel a bit lost in terms of, okay, what to do, what next? So what would be your expectation as a Ukrainian citizen, but also as an executive director of the Center for Civil Liberties, what do you expect from German society, from German civil society? What can we do to confront these challenges that were mentioned?
First of all, I told about that before, that Ukraine wanna be one of EU family, and that's why we really care of that family exist. So that's homework. I hope you still interesting to have this EU like really not only club of interest, you know. A lot of European society show us that inside of EU have a lot of discussion, had a lot of doubts, maybe about migrants, but exactly not so many migrants comes to EU. That's to change their, I don't know, you know, identity or something. This, but we need to care about values and how they in practice, how we live in the daily way. Because we're fighting for democracy because we see example of EU. We see example of German society, one of the most successful in this. So we really need first point that you care about your own state in democracy way, please. We need you, sure. It's homework. It's quite easy.
Okay, our homework:
yeah.
care for our state, care for the EU, so that we can accept Ukraine as a member. Ursula von der Leyen has said today that in 2030 Ukraine could join the EU. I just read about it. Okay, that was number one, and then what else?
Number two.
Number two. What is number two?
Yeah, I told about that. Ukraine treasure, it's first of all people. A lot of people here you have from Ukraine. Some of them comes here earlier than invasion coming 2022, but a lot comes here. German, like second after Poland, country who receive so many people. I know they're not perfect, nobody perfect. And my family, for example, here, because I banned from Russia and Belarus from 2017, so I send out my family, it's my sister and my mom, and both of them, they have officially job here, they pay the tax, and they're really proud of that. My sister even speaks German now, not my mom, sorry. It's too hard for her. But you have a lot
of refugees, war refugees.
Yeah, and these people, again, they are not perfect. They are not angels. It's and they are stressed, and they may be like really they're afraid. You need to understand. Even you comes here, and not every day you hear the sirens. That not mean you are safe. Your childhood totally destroyed. For example, my native Mykolaiv, like bombed every day. Your families, your property, all of your identity now stressed every day. So, second point, it's help people who you have here. And third point.
Third and last point, because we need to come to the question.
Yes. Last one. It's exactly support Ukraine. When we win, we will be a good partner. I mean, we're smart, we're hard worker, and we want to build one of most successful country and state. And so, if you will support us now, it's a good investigation.
It's a good investment. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have 2 microphones in the room, and I'm ready to take questions. Please show your hands, and then I have a question.
And please tell if it will be in German. I will.
Yeah.
Sorry.
If you can also ask in German. Please introduce yourself briefly, and you can ask in German. But if you do it in English, it will be
So
easier.
I can do it in English.
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
Leonie, and I'm a student, and yeah, I'm with my class here. So my question is, can the peace that was established after the downfall of the Soviet Union really be called a peace or a just peace? Was it an unjust peace? And how did it maybe lead to the attack on Ukraine? And I would love that both of you answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question.
We answered now?
No, I think this was a good one and an intense one. So the collapse of the Soviet Union, what kind of, well, there is this narrative of the peaceful collapse of the Soviet Union. I think there are some
people died there.
Exactly. If you look to the Baltic countries, they would have
and
a
Caucasian
different
countries.
Exactly. So, but what kind of peace was that? And was there a connection between that 1991 and the Russian attack?
Well, it's a particular peace because it's not an escalated war like the First or the Second World War. It's the end of the Cold War that was cold in the midst of Europe, but not so cold in other parts of the world, if you think about Vietnam or Afghanistan. But again, compared to the millions of dead in the 20th century, this was a rather peaceful transition. But it did not mean that a lot of people living in these areas were content with what happened afterwards. As a historian, I would say it's a lot to do with emotional appreciations of humiliation. I mean, if I talk to anti-Putin colleagues in Russia, really no friends of Putin, his fellow historians, who told me, if you lived through the 1990s, the Yeltsin years, a lot of these people felt humiliated. Not made easier by remarks, including Obama, who talked about regional power. International politics has very often to do with gestures, modes of communication, bad wording. I'm not saying that this is an explanation for what happened, but I'm pretty sure that needs to be taken into account. I mean, the way in which the West thought we have won, the triumph of liberalism, of capitalism, even the end of history, and a famous German historian, Reinhard Koselleck, once argued the real lessons in history are not learned by the victorious, but by those who are defeated. And I think the West, in this moment of post-1989-91, became to an extent, maybe not blind, but a little bit ignorant of sensibilities. I'm not saying that this is an explanation for the aggression, but it's something that you need to take into account when you talk about collective perceptions of humiliation. And that plays a role in the post-1990 world, I'm pretty sure.
Oleksandra.
You know, half of my family is Russians, and a huge problem with persons who have identity of Russian, they are not reflect.
They are not what?
Reflect. They are not make any reflexy about something. So if you ask about are they, like, we have a joke that Russia, it's a country with unpredictable past.
Oh yes, I know this one. Yeah.
Because every time any new authority trying to change the history, explain why only there need to be there.
Creating new narratives, so to say.
Yeah, so that's why memorial works, and one of the biggest and most important, because nobody, every time when someone told about Hitler, it's something absolutely bad, and it's horrible. Nobody reminds Stalin, but Stalin killed more than 60 million of civilians inside his own country, and nobody investigated fully. Only memorial, exactly, that's people, historians, who decided to bring back names and of victims of this regime. That's why like we know about Ukrainian political prisoners and our most important people who was killed during the Stalin period. And nobody investigate who exactly bring all of the deaths to our history. So that's why at Ukraine so high, so high expectation of justice. Because we know what happened if you don't have it. If you say, okay, forgotten, now we're independent, we need to forget about all what happened before. But now Putin told about, but Stalin's a great manager, and people hear him. So that's really important for us, and that's biggest lesson for Ukraine from falling of Soviet Union. It's need to be a part of your past, and you need to have a reflection what happened there.
You need to have a reflection on the crimes and also on the dark aspects of the
even
past.
Our own. I mean, Ukrainians take a part in some things, like for example, pogrom of Jewish. So we need to recognize it. We need to ask to forgive us, and we need to do something. Never exactly did it again. So that's why it's important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So there's other questions. I have one gentleman here, and then there is the young man over there, number 3. Yes, please. You start.
I'm Gerd Riedel, 72 years old. What do you think about the following possibility? May Donald Trump, for example, say this or that? Putin at first will act according to the famous words of Yuri Gagarin. Machina roboti normalne, idiom dalsze. In English, the machine works well. We continue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this was a question to you probably. So will we then maybe take another one, the young gentleman over there, and then it gives you time to think about your answer, Oleksandra.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm Giuliano. I'm a student as well, and I'd like to ask, since we talked about diplomacy and negotiations, but at the moment parts of the east of Ukraine, densely populated areas are occupied. So I believe to have heard you or Mr. Zelensky stating that the Ukrainian position is yet not powerful enough for negotiations that will be just and fair. So, do you think that Ukraine will have a strong position in the near future?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this brings us back to the question we discussed somewhere earlier in the panel about the issue of victory and position of strength. So,
I'm started from first question, gentlemen. Putin sure will speak about that for his own audience. I mean, he even today can say we have won this war, and so just relax, all of you, and hold the soldiers from front line. We defend the Donbas ethnic group. We stop the genocide at Ukraine. So go home, and that will be a catastrophe for Russian society. Even now, they not take back the soldiers' corps which stay at the battlefield, and I don't know how they will hide these numbers of people who killed at the battlefield. But Putin have a machine of propaganda, and people believe in that. So he can say anything what he wants. When we speak about tribunal for Putin, we always mean not only person Putin, but Putin's system, which consists of his political machine, his propaganda machine, and his military machine. It's near 15% of population, but it's controlled 140 million people. So yes, he will tell it, but each his phrase not change the reality. Reality is that Ukrainians exist. People who want to support Ukraine independence exist, and so we will continue in different way. Maybe it will be not frontline, but other way. We keep the fight for that. My organization, sure, it's my plan.
It's your plan, okay?
Yeah, to keep the fight. About strength position for negotiation from Ukraine side, Taiwan founded, technology. You need to protect Taiwan because whole the world exactly depends how will work this factory of chips, So it always exists some asymmetric answer.
What do you mean by that? So we have to protect Taiwan because Taiwan produces
chips.
Chips.
Okay.
I'm just trying to give the context.
So it exists always to take a strong position, but not create I don't know, nuclear bomb or something like same like they have, but found other way, and it can be different ideas, and all of them discussed at Ukraine society, but yeah, that's how we need to, we found the answers, how to be in the part of the table. Maybe we need to create our own table.
Okay, Jörn Leonhard, how do you look at the position of strength for Ukraine? Do you foresee any?
Your question is really important, but I'm afraid, I mean, if I look at the things as they develop now, there's a real danger that Ukraine will not be treated as a subject of international politics, but as an object. And it reminds you historically, for instance, of the fate of Poland during the period of the partitions. I'm not saying that this is the end of history. I mean, not by accident was a Polish state then reconstituted in the name of national self-determination after the First World War and the collapse of the empires. But what we see now between Russia and the United States, and I'm pretty sure that China will be prepared to join this club, is a different kind of politics that does not look at self-determination, territorial integrity, state sovereignty, but at interest and deals. And this is putting, you may say, the raison d'etat of Europe into danger. And Europe has to understand this danger and act accordingly, not just rhetorically and by traveling to Kiev, but to do it in practical terms. And if the European Union cannot do it as a whole, then you need a core group of states that are prepared to go further.
So that means investing more into defense. That means we're talking about soldiers, boots on the ground?
Yeah, we are talking about a potential international Europe-based military involvement, for instance, in order to protect a buffer zone. Not an ideal solution, but at least something that gives Europe a productive function, and possibly the beginning also of a process by which Europe makes itself more independent from what's going on in the United States. And I think that's the situation we are facing. But I'm afraid to say even that is a long-term process. It won't help Ukraine in the short term, and the potential outlook could be some sort of Israelization of Ukraine, a loss of territory, and making Ukraine as strong militarily in order to defend itself, maybe not now or in a year's time, but maybe in 5 years or in 10 years. Not a very bright outlook. It will cost a lot of money, and it will not bring perfect security, but it's maybe what you can do now with a horizon of 5 years.
Thank you. We have time for one last question and a short answer. So is there anybody? There is a gentleman over there. Yes, please.
Thank you. Martin Dietze. I have a question to both panelists. First part to Jörg Leonhard. What role does colonialism play in Russian history? And second part to Oleksandra. What do you observe with Russians that you know? how big role does play colonialism, imperialism in their mindset today?
Oh, that's a good one. Jörn Leonhard,
Yeah,
would you like, because I'd like to finish with Oleksandra for the last word tonight.
It's absolutely essential. We've talked about the politics of history. When I last visited colleagues in Russia, that was 2019, I was shocked by Disney parks all around in the countryside, Disney parks, history theme parks. And the narrative you found in these history theme parks was always the great Russian Empire. Not just in territorial ways, but the great Russian Empire being superior to the decadent West. Closely connected to the idea of Russian Orthodoxy, the Third Rome, closely connected to the function, the national function, the imperial function of the Russian military, huge crowds of students and school classes in uniform marching in front of monuments, and that had a very particular quality. So I'm not saying that we have a replica of the Russian Empire of the 18th or 19th century, but I'm arguing that referring to the imperial past has become a weapon in propaganda, in the history, in the politics of history, and it has impregnated Putin's thinking. That we know from a lot of people who are specialists about these networks in the Kremlin. This kind of imperial thinking, I think, is something we really underestimated in the West. We thought it's a matter of history, but it's nothing that belongs to the 21st century, and I think we had to learn a very bitter lesson with regard to that.
Oleksandra, your experience with Russian contacts, colleagues, how imperialism?
Yeah, first of all, I need to mention that we have partners from Russia, civil society, human rights defenders, lawyers who help us, for example, figure out where they located our prisoners or hostages or our children. And that's, again, we need to remember that people have opportunity to have their choice even in the middle of Putin propaganda's area. So such people exist, and we're really proud of them. Most of them human rights defenders, and they're with us from 2014. They are not just understood that in 2022. And same with Belarus. When we speak about imperialistic thoughts at Russia Federation, that's huge problem, and that's huge problem that most of people don't feel this in themselves, even when they trying to be good for Ukraine. But most of all other 14 republic of Soviet Union can told you that yes, Russia was head of empire, and that's empire called Soviet Union, even after Russia.
After the First World.
So that's a lot of young people at Kazakhstan, a lot of young people in Georgia now trying to fight to have their own
decolonize Russian history.
Because Russia see this soft power at the beginning, but after it started to be hard power. They believe that each person who speak in Russia, that Russians, it's owning of Russia. So that's why Ukrainians started, like most young people, started speaking Ukrainian only to show that we are not Russians. But it's not normal when somebody uses a language like a weapon. You know, that's why we started told about we are not Russian-speaking country, we are Russian-understanding country. So we still understand, and that's why it's so hurt, because we know what they told about you, German people. We know what they told about each other people. They trying to say something bad about anyone around the Russia. Inside the Russia, they trying to separate the groups and all of this. So is it empire? Yes, I think that's empire. But Russia empire never care about their own people, and same they do that now in Russia. And so I think this identity of part of empire inside their own population, that's the biggest problem. Ukrainians started to feel themselves strong Ukrainians when someone attacked and started trying to take out our identity. But nobody attacked Russians, and they still don't have other identity except imperialistic. That's a problem. They don't have their own identification, what that means to be a Russian, like Russians, what that means. What do you love except the greatness of huge, better organized territory, Russia Federation. They are not federation at all. They don't give any rules and any power to their federative body. But it's a question for psychiatrists, you know, not for me.
Well, and it's a question for a separate event. I mean, how to deal with the legacies of empire in Russia today. There was a sentence I've learned from Timothy Snyder, who is a historian as well, and who is very supportive for Ukraine. And he once said about Russia and the lack of a vision for the future. He said, if you cannot lead your people in space, then you lead them in time. So that means you create a narrative about a glorious past to compensate on the lack of a future, of a vision for the future. Let us finish with that. I'd like to thank all of you for coming, attending, for listening, for posing your questions. I was particularly happy to see a lot of young faces in the room tonight. I'm happy that you are so much interested in this question of peace, war and peace, and in the country of Ukraine. Thank you, Oleksandra Romantsova, for joining us tonight here, and a big thanks also to Jörn Leonhard for your historical expertise and sharp analysis of the current context. Please feel invited to continue discussions during the reception we have prepared outside, so over a glass of water or wine, feel invited to continue discussing, and I can promise that also Jörn Leonhard and Oleksandra will be with us for at least half an hour, so if you have questions to them, please feel free to address them. Thank you very much.